Okay, time for something a little bit different. I'm going to call this series Tutorials from the Couch, for obvious reasons. I'm using an interesting little product, a screen recorder called Camtasia. It's available for the Mac or for the PC. My goal here is to record the Chapter 9 classroom in a book tutorial, make it available, and then I have this little picture-in-picture thing of myself talking and maybe personalize it a little bit more, a few more features. Okay, so time for the digital lesson. I'm going to be working with Adobe CS4, which is Creative Suite 4. Pretty nice product. And what I'm looking at doing is a wine bottle tutorial. So I roughly followed the tutorial that's laid out in the PDF that I have on the server, which I showed in class. This is around page 367, I believe. We'll get going here. Now, when I open up Adobe CS4, you can see it's a very slick looking interface. I'm going to open up the olive oil bottle, and I'm going to open up the olives. There we go. And I'll get these all ready to go. Now that was a neat little feature. The new version of Adobe CS4, minimize this now, when you open two files, tries to put them as tabs, kind of like doing what the Firefox web browser is doing. Okay, so the name of the game, what we want to do is we want to have this sculpted and looking like a sort of a cross between, I guess, a wine bottle and an olive oil bottle. And what we'll do is, first thing is we'll write the term OLIO on here. So I'm just going to move this guy off the side for a second. Make this a little bit bigger. All right, Apple Plus, very smooth effect. So I will go to my text tool right here, and Myriad Pro, and I'm going to type OLIO. I want to make it pretty big. The book advises say about size 78, as I recall. And I'm going to type OLIO. Okay, so when you choose the text tool, as we work, you're going to learn that you can write by default horizontally, but there's vertical, and then there's these masks, which are really quite fun. I'm just going to click on the four-sided arrow, this one up here. This is a neat little tool because it enables you to move things. And the tool tip for the move tool is V. I know that's very commonsensical. Move that into place. Now, if we look on our layers palette, which for me is showing down here, your layers will probably be up here. Your layers, whenever you type text, you will always find that text itself will always create its own layer, and it's named after what you see here. So, okay, great. What does that mean? Basically, what you want to do is make sure your text is highlighted, and that line underneath, that's not underlining. That's just the baseline for the text. You want to make sure that the text is smoothly aliased. What does that mean? If I hit Apple plus command and jump in a few times, I'll just click on the arrow to move off. If you see how smooth the edges of the letter are, if you zoom in, you can see how Photoshop actually draws the edges of letters. If you don't have aliasing on, and if you turn it off, for example, you'll see just how rough the edge of the letters can be. Now, in order to make the letters look sort of like they're not Windows 95 or Windows 98-ish, what you want to do is highlight your letters and choose an aliasing, anti-aliasing, that's very smooth. Now you can see what it's done. It's a little bit of trickery. They make the edge of the pixels a little bit transparent, and it looks smooth overall. And that's a little trick that you see these days with Vista, Windows 7, a lot of the Linux operating systems, Mac OS 10. It makes their screen look really quite good. So get OLIO on there, and let's move that down a little bit. And one last thing, you want it to be fairly thick. So with this font, let's not go with regular, let's go with bold. There we go. Bold gives me a thicker letter. Because what I want to do in step 2 is I want to move to the second picture that's open in the file folder called olives.psd. Remember that PSDs are Photoshop document files. That's what they stand for. When you grab the move tool and you're on a separate picture, separate document, and you move it on to another one, it copies it as a layer, and you'll see it here. So now that I've moved that over using the move tool basically copied it over, and at this point you can see, and I think just to make things easier, I'm going to pull this up here so you can see this a bit easier. As it comes in, it gets layered, named layer 1, layer 2, and things like that. You always want to name it after what it is. So I'm going to call this, double click on the name, olives, because that's what the picture represents. Okay, so here's a little important note. You should always name your layers. Second of all, when you're doing work on different layers, you have to manually switch around to affect what's on what layer. So if I wanted to mess around with the OLIO text, I've got to go to the OLIO layer. And if I want to mess around with the olives and move the olives around, I got to move to the olive layer. If I go to grab OLIO like this, right, you think you're going to grab on the word OLIO. It doesn't work that way because this is blue highlighted. You're actually on the olives layer. So that can be frustrating. There is a neat little option here, and I'll just zoom in. See that button there called Auto Select? That button, Auto Select, when you're using the Move tool, gives Photoshop a bit more intelligence. What does that mean? It means that no matter where I click, when Auto Select is on, and it's not on by default, if I'm clicking the olives, I'm moving the olives. If I'm clicking OLIO, I'm moving OLIO. It's a little bit more slick. For the purpose of this tutorial, though, I'm just going to leave it off because that's how life will be for you, unless you remember to turn it on. And it's off by default. So here we've got the olives. What I want to do is I want to have these olives shine through the words OLIO. So that's masking. And I tend to think a good description for this is Halloween, where when you wear a mask, your eyes shine through the mask. So how do we get the olives to shine through the letters OLIO? It's not actually that hard. First, let's resize this because it's kind of a large graphic. So I'm just going to bring it about down here. To resize, normally you can right click and resize, except if you're on the Move tool. It's always been my pet peeve with Adobe. As soon as I move off the Move tool, any other tool, and I usually go to the Marquee tool, this one here beside it, any other tool but the Move tool, when I right click, I can free transform. Okay, free transform is a good thing. When you click on it, free transform will allow me to resize this. And if you want to resize it and keep the width and the height the same, when we talk about width and height, you'll hear about something called aspect ratio. That's just the proportion of width to height. It doesn't matter what computer you're on, PC, Mac, Linux, whatever. Hold down Shift and drag in. And as you drag in like that, even though the picture's getting smaller, it's keeping the width and the height proportion the same. And if you look, you know you're in free transform, and I'll just zoom in a little bit here, because you get these little blocky handles on the end. Okay, so if you got to remember to hit to commit. You got to commit to this. You hit return on your keyboard, and then those little handles go away, and you're in business. Move the olives down, basically over top of the letters so that they cover them. And we have to do a little trick called masking. Okay, now first thing about Photoshop is it's menu intensive, it's button intensive. I mean, if you look at these buttons here, for goodness sake, there's buttons under every button, and you can see the CS4 has some more goodies in here, which make me really want to mess around with it. Lasso tool, there's variations, and every time you check one of these, the tool itself appears up here. Okay, so what do you want to do in this case? Let's just keep it simple. I want the olives to shine through the letters. The way Adobe does that is the picture that you want to come through has to be on top of the object. So in this case, the object is OLIO, so the picture has to be on top of it. So I'm going to come over here, and you have a little button there, a little circular button with a playhead. I'm just going to click on this one that looks like a menu because it's a more advanced version of Photoshop. And you'll see create a clipping mask. Okay, so I want to create a mask, and when I choose that, pretty cool, zoom in on this, you see a little symbol. You see that little arrowy thing shows up, which means this picture is masking through this layer. What can really mess up your masks, and it happens invariably in every class, is that a student will be working, let's say, on this layer. Anytime you create a layer, it always puts the new layer on top. You don't want any new layers getting in between this mask. It'll mess it right up. So to avoid that, let's just make sure we have our olives in the right place. And I'm going to move my olives around a little bit. I'm on the olive mask right there, and you can see them moving behind the lettering. So I'm just going to kind of move it like that a little bit. Looks good. If you shift click on both of these layers, I highly recommend right now, the smartest thing to do is, if you've nailed your mask, just merge the layers. So if you come up here, you'll see that merge layers is a choice. That's the command, that little flowery thing that I sometimes call the Apple key. Command E, and the command is always found on either side of the spacebar. So you can also right click, and when you right click, Photoshop kind of knows you're looking for a menu here. So I'm going to just say merge layers. Poof. So the layers have been put together. So now it's just one thing ready to go. To make it look a bit more entertaining and a bit more three-dimensional, move it up a little bit here, like that, we'll do what are called layer effects. Now, Photoshop is pretty crazy for Windows. Look at all the windows you can have access to. These are all floating menus that give you the ability to adjust things. And you can see layers is on, and I've got my color one, that's over here, and adjustments was on. A whole bunch of stuff that sometimes you don't need. And you can turn it off by unchecking it, by clicking on it. For example, this adjustment one. I don't really need that, so let's get it out of there. The one here in the background called history turns out to be quite useful because it lets me go back through a series of steps I've done, or even save a series of steps, so I can kind of go back in history en masse. So if I wanted to go back all the way to here, if I've made a big mistake and I just want to go back in time, I can easily do it. What I want to do now in the tutorial, they say make this look a little bit more three-dimensional. Okay, well, pull this up. At the bottom of the layers palette, and palettes are just floating menus, you're going to see one here called FX. Right? Yours will look similar to that. Layer effects are things you can do on the layer to make them look pretty cool. I'm going to click on it, and you'll see these options. You've got blending options, give something a drop shadow, all these sort of things to do. Let's just go through one. I always recommend just going to blending options overall, saying, okay, I got blending options I want to do. And then I want to say, look, I want a drop shadow. And you can see the stock or default drop shadow has been added to the edge of these letters, and it looks pretty good. So right now this is blue highlight. If you want to actually get to drop shadow, it's funny, you got to go to the option. This here is the angle of the sun. So if my cursor right now is where the sun is, then the sun is coming down. The sun is at 118 degrees, and it's kind of interesting. In the video you can actually see me do this. Remember that angles in mathematics always go counterclockwise. So for you guys, I'll do this properly, counterclockwise they go like this. So starting at 0, about 45, going to 90, going past. When you look at this, the sun, in this case, is over here past a 90-degree angle. That's 118 degrees. That's why your shadow is opposite of the sun. If I move that a little bit, you can see what it's done. It's moving the shadow to the inside. I'll just put this back to 118. The stock is fine. And you mess around with these a little bit. Currently it's a 505 here. The distance, if you move it, you can actually play with that. I say be careful with that. Spread does this, spreads it out more. And the size, that just makes it really kind of hazy. Right? So it was like basically a 505. So I'll go back to about where we were. And I'm going to say that looks pretty good. While I'm in here, let's mess around with the text and let's bevel it like we would in a shop class. So like a virtual router. So I'm going to go to the beveling tool. Got to find it. Haha, there it is. And beveling, if you notice, the edge of my letters just got a little bit of an outline. It's starting to look really three-dimensional. Now, beveling is literally can be done on the inside of the object, can be done on the outside of the object. I think that this looks really smooth with an inner bevel. Looks really good. But there's some other things you can do. Embossing, pillow embossing. You can see what that does. Best way to get to know what these do is to just choose them and then mess around with the settings. I'm pretty happy with the inner bevel. I don't want to go berserk because currently that's at 100%. If you go too much, it just gets chiseled. Now, okay, if you like that, you know, if you want that sort of granite stone look, fly at her. But about 100%, close enough, it looks really, really slick. Play around with these settings, get to know them, have fun. Okay? For the sake of this tutorial, these are the two blending options I'm going to do. In more advanced tutorials, I'll do some other things. But for now, that's pretty good. So you can see my actions here, my history is getting pretty long. Here's a little tip. Doesn't come up till later tutorials. In the history panel, there's this one that looks like a camera. You could actually at certain times record your steps. Now, I'm trying to remember. I think Adobe does about 25 steps, and then you can't go back any further. If you click on this and do a snapshot right there, it's like recording a little piece of history. You could actually go back to that exact moment in time. That could be back like 80 steps. And it's pretty handy to have the snapshot. So we've got OLIO looking pretty good. Move it down, put it about here, and I need to put in some little hash marks here. You'll see in the tutorial. Now, in class, I kind of talk at length about the difference between fonts, and I got to go over it quick here. On Macs, they've got a nice system finder up here, and I'm running 10.6, the newest one. It doesn't matter. If you type font book, what you do is you can call up the system fonts. And I kind of like to do that because it's a great way of displaying fonts. Fonts are all the things you have on your computer. All the different character sets you have. And I'm going to type in Arial. When you look at the Arial font, I'll just give it a second here. My laptop's getting nice and warm. An Arial font, when I zoom in, doesn't have little feet under the letters. Now the word for foot is serif. So when I always compare Times New Roman to Arial, this, because it doesn't have feet, use the French word sans and serif together, which means without feet. This is a non-footed font. Okay, wonderful. What does Times look like? Well, if you go to Times New Roman, which tends to be meant for print production because the little hooked feet always makes me think of how you would do the title for the movie Scrooge or something like that. Old time fonts. These were meant for newspapers, and this actually gave the eye a bit more to sort of grab onto when you read on print materials, magazines, books, etc. This isn't what you do on the internet. On the internet, these things tend to be a bit more blurred, and they're a little on the internet or a digital screen. It just hurts the eye more. It's actually the opposite effect. Because it's got the little hookies on it, we call this serifed. So here's a general rule you'll find. When you're designing for the web, use sans serif fonts like Arial, and when you're designing for print, it's a little bit more sort of conventional to use serifed fonts. In this case, I want to put some hash marks in here using a sans serif font like Arial. So I'm going to click here. It's pretty important that when we go to do this, that you can choose Myriad Pro, but remember it's got the last one in here, and this is a sans serif font, pretty obvious. Let's choose, like, I believe about size 34 will do it. And I'm just going to make sure that it's black. You choose the color here, the color picker. I'll show that again. When you choose text, here's the type of text, alias, anti-aliasing, whether it's left, center, right, justified. The color, I'll stick with the stock black. And some people like to drag a text box, but that's not really necessary in this case. I'm just going to click here and put in a bunch of eyes. Okay, it looks pretty good. And I'm going to point out that it made its own layer. Text is good for that. I'm going to put that down there. All right, so it's looking pretty good. It could be a little larger. So I went on the Move tool. I got to go back to this tool, and I want to highlight over all of it, and maybe make it a little bit larger. So you can put any number in here you want. You can do it manually. Not 348. How about 38? Maybe 40. No, not bad. And I'm not happy with the how close these are together. It's not looking as slick as I wanted. Photoshop to the rescue, because I have control over ridiculous things in Photoshop. One of the things, if you've ever used Microsoft Word, that you're kind of helpless with is you have no control over what's called the tracking, and that's the space between the letters. It's a pretty easy thing to fix, actually. When you click on this and highlight it, and you say, okay, I want to adjust this, it's not too difficult to mess with. There's a window that you need, and what you're doing is you're trying to mess with the spaces between the characters. So I'm going to call up the character window, and here you see a new palette has appeared. There's character, there's paragraph, and if you need to, there's a little menu in the corner, and if it says, you can tell it to show all options. In this case, I've got them displayed so you won't see it. Okay, so once you've gone through these options, okay, and if you need to make any changes, you did so, you can highlight your characters here, okay, and go to leading, or sorry, scratch that, go to tracking. Tracking is something that you can set manually. It's the space in between characters. For the sake of exaggeration, I'll put it at, say, 100. I'll put it at 250. And you can see what tracking does. That's not something you often see that you have control over in something like Microsoft Office. A lot of people wouldn't even look at it. But in desktop publishing, if you've got control over it, it makes your stuff look a lot better. So I'm going to back that off, and I'll go with, say, about 100. It looks pretty good. I could probably go with slightly larger, so go back in time. Made my size of my font too small, so let's make it, say, 42. There we go, it's back. And looks a lot better. And I'll just, let's see here, maneuver that into place. There we go. I like to use the keys for this. It gives me that little bit of lining up. Another thing you can do, if you like to line things up, you can also view the rulers. Okay, so that's under the View menu, and you'll see them pop up. Now these rulers can be set in whatever units you want. If you right-click in here, currently mine's set to centimeters. Inches is something you're probably a little more familiar with. And people who like to line things up, it sometimes escapes them that the rulers themselves, if you click in the middle of a ruler and you pull down, you can pull down guidelines. And they'll be this sort of blue color, stock default sort of color. And pull from the center of that one out, and I'll put that at 3.5. And you can readjust them if you want. 8.5, wherever the heck you'd like this. Okay, about like that. If you want them gone, you just drag them off the screen, like that. And their history. Rulers can be really useful. They're sticky, so objects that you drag near them will sort of stick to them. In this case, I'm not going to use that. I'll just sort of go on manual control. I need, now that I've got this here looking pretty good, and I've got my layer effects here. I need to put in some red lettering in nice sort of classy kind of sans serif font, no feet, and I need to put it here. So I'm going to select this tool again. Be sure to go up here and change your options. Okay, let's make it say size 11 point, which is, by the way, is about the average size of font that you would use with Times when you're submitting an essay. And I'm going to choose kind of a nice red, sort of a deeper red, a little bit more cardinal. And you can see what it did. See how this changed? Because look which layer is selected. That's a classic mistake. This layer is selected, and I told it while the layer was selected to be a different size text and to be red, and it did exactly what I told it. So I'll hit undo, which is Command Z, right? And it takes you back. Always select off your layers. Deactivate your layers, okay? It tends to save you. So now I don't have anything in here. Myriad Pro is the last thing it remembers. I'm going to go Myriad Pro, size 11, and now nothing's changing because I'm being a bit more safe. There's my cardinal red. And I'm going to come down in here, and I'm going to hit Command plus or Apple plus and zoom in a little bit. And I will type extra virgin here in caps. All right, looks pretty good. And I'm going to position that right about here, kind of in the middle. I'll zoom out, Apple minus. And that looks pretty good. Just sort of staying with the convention of how olive oil is produced, extra virgin olive oil, cold pressed. If you like olive oil, it's very, very good for you. And that's one of the procedures for producing it. So I'm going to select off of my layers now. While I've got this color selected, maybe one of the things I should do now, just to get it done, is to put Product of Italy vertically down here. Okay, so if I go to my text tool, you'll see that I've got a choice for vertical typing. Okay, well that's a choice. Not everything is horizontal. So if I choose vertical typing, it remembers my last settings. And when I go to type, see how the I-beam, the typing beam, is sideways? So it's ready to go. It knows what I want to do. So I'll just say where I want to start typing, and I'll say Product of Italy. L-Y. There we go. And you can see the baseline is a vertical line. It's holding the text in a line. And I can just move that wherever I want it. I'll just put it a little bit off to the side like that. And use the arrows. Again, you can mess with the leading, or I always say that, I mean the tracking. Escape. There we go. Highlight it. And you can come over here, and in this case, it's in your interest to see what you really would like. Do you want to tighten it up a little bit, or do you want to make it a little more broad, about like that? You choose, whatever you'd like. Okay? There we go. Product of Italy. Sometimes I select the Move tool. It's a great way to deselect your active tool. There we go. Okay, it's time to really kind of broadcast that this is olive oil. So I'm going to choose the text tool again, select off of my layers. Notice that I spelled Italy wrong. Hey, let's fix that. Italy. There we go. Okay, that looks a lot better. There was something there that was bugging me. And I'm going to say that it's olive oil. I have to put that in words here. And I'm going to do a really neat thing here where I'm going to warp the text. Photoshop will let you, there's a line that goes under your text, and that line can actually be warped. Now that's a bit more of an InDesign trick, but Photoshop will still pick it up too. You're going to see that. The line here for this was horizontal. The line that controlled this was horizontal. The line that controlled this was vertical. But there's more you can do. So let's put this back to the horizontal type tool. Let's choose off of our layer before we forget. A white color up in the corner. And Myriad Pro, I'll stick with Myriad Pro. I'm going to make this a little bigger. I'm going to choose, like, say, maybe an 18. And I'm going to type olive oil. Now this is going to be white. I want caps. Take my caps off. And I want that bigger. Not quite large enough for me. So let's go. Oh, way too big. The leading is set what I had last time. I'm going to take this back down to something a bit more reasonable. Have it set a little high. I'm going to put it back, or sorry, tracking. I'll put it back on 25. Now, kind of move it into place. I want it about here, and move that up a little bit. And there's something really neat you can do with the text tool. I'm going to highlight my text like that, and you'll see this one up here. Now this is the warp text feature, and it often gets overlooked because it's kind of neat. It's just not one of the first choices, so people don't look at it. What you're essentially doing is you have control over the baseline. In this case, it's a flat line which has got all of our text lined up. If I choose to warp that line, I can have a lot of fun. What you're going to do in this case is a flag warp of the line, so just sort of a curvy thing. And you can see what that's doing to the line. So you could bend this vertically, horizontally, and you can be conservative in your bend, just a little bit of a bend, right, or a whole lot. Horizontal distortion, you can kind of adjust which way the wave goes, which is kind of cool. And vertical distortion, not too much though, because vertical distortion looks a little bit crazy with this text. Just choose something that you like. I went with the horizontal options. Vertical option would not look good at all. And there's a couple other ones in here, but choose something that you like. I'll move off now, and you can see I've got this kind of neat sort of flag thing done with my text. Alright, so you can see we're doing quite a bit of work over here. And move this down. Now it's time to put a product description in. So down here is a little sticky tab, and it's annoying. This is a message, say, from somebody else who was working on the project with you as to what the information about on the wine bottle label, or sorry, olive oil label should be. If I double click it, looks pretty slick in CS4. Like fine wine, each variety of olive is unique, so on and so forth, selling the product. All you're expected to do here is highlight this, hold down Apple C or Command C, copy it, and then you come over here, choose your text tool. Now be careful here. Select off of your layers, that's important, and choose, in this case I think it's white lettering. You could choose white lettering. I wouldn't go with red lettering because red's already being used. Try to go with either a white or a black against this background. In this case, oh what the heck, I'll just choose black. Down here in the opposite corner. And I don't want size 36, it's way too big. So I'm going to take this down to about a size 11. Let's go with that. Now when I go to do a text box, before I told you with the text box that you could just click and start typing. In this case, I'm going to correct that. Because the label is going to be about this big, I want to create a text box first because that's about the size I want. Now I'm going to go to either Edit, Paste, or you can see it's Command V. It's up to you. I like to use keystrokes. I'm going to go Command or Apple V. You got to be really on the ball here. By choosing 11 point black, and in this case bold probably isn't what I want, but I can change it later. I've got my text in here. Maybe I want a 12. What the heck? Get your text to be sort of attractive inside of the label. I've said 12. I'm going to adjust that. 18's way too big. So I'm happy with that. And as I grab the edge of the container, let's just move this around a little bit. Alright. I'm not altogether happy with how the text looks. So you can center it here. That right justifies it. I'm not too happy with that. I would right now call up the character window, and this one here for paragraphs really gives me control over things. You can see left, center, right, but then these ones here are justifications. Justification just puts the text edge to edge, and there's 3 different versions. Your last line of justifying can either be leftmost, centermost, or rightmost. I'm going to go with this. Now when I zoom out, it's a little bit subtle, but you can see this looks a lot better. And we can resize it just gently, and you can see it tends to jump. And now move it over a little bit. And it's something that you mess with. You'll say, oh, you know, that's just a little too close to my other labels. So, and this is all from copying what was in that little virtual sticky tab at the bottom. Right? And you'll mess, right? Oops. Aha, see? Things you can do. Just click on the olive oil one here. There we go. And move that around. There, it's got a bit better of a balance. Justifying puts a lot of space between words. Some people don't find that very attractive. But we'll go with it. So now I pretty well have my whole label set up. One issue. So I've got a wine bottle, and I've basically got a rectangular label with some pretty neat objects on it, but everything's squarish, and this bottle is curved. If you put a label on a curved bottle, the label curves, but that's not showing up here. So I've got all these funky layers here, and I can figure out what I'm going to do. What has to happen is they need to act together like a group. I have to tell them to be what's called like a smart object, and that's a group of layers that behaves the same way. So what do? Come over to your layers and holding down, selecting the first layer, highlighting it, and then holding down the shift key while clicking on the very last layer groups everything in between. And I'll go to this little menu guy on the side, and you will see this option here, convert to smart object. Okay, the object's smart because everything inside is a bunch of layers that act together. So again, that is right here, little menu, and yours looks like a button. That's how we got to the clipping mask, but in this case, convert to smart object, and look what happens. If I zoom in, this is what a smart object symbol looks like. Okay, and now it's all acting like a group. So if I grab it, the whole thing moves around. Highlight the object, in this case this guy, and you go to Edit, Transform, and under Transform, leave the menu up for a second, you'll see the warp option. Okay. When you go to warp a smart object, what you'll see is you get these little handles. Now these are called Bezier handles. Bezier means something little handles that'll help you make a curve. Watch the ruler on the side, which I have set to inches, by the way, when I pull this down. So I'm going to pull that down to just 1 tick under 8 there. And you can see, oh cool, the smart object is warping. There you go. Try to do both sides exactly the same. And it's warping the wine bottle so it looks believable. I'm going to bring this down to just 1 tick on the 14. There we go. And the same thing here. And as I do that, I get my wine bottle to look fairly believable. So I'll select on the move tool just to commit. And it's a little too deep, but you can see it has done essentially what we wanted. So I'll just run through that again. Edit, transform, warp, and try to keep track of how much you warp this by. Bring this down. This time I'll be a little more conservative. I'll just come down to the 8-inch mark. Okay, and on the bottom I will just go down 1 division. Actually, fibbed. Down 14, like that. Good. And like that. Good. Alright. And I'll just commit to that. So there you've got your bottle. Let me just zoom out. So it looks fairly uniform. You just kind of want to get your top curvature looking like your bottom curvature. And you've got yourself a wine bottle. Now the book has done a bit better job of spreading this out a little more. This is just sort of freeformed. I actually don't have any of the notes in front of me. Done this tutorial enough times to essentially know how to do this one. And there's a great variety of skills that you picked up in this. This tutorial talks about layers. It introduced clipping masks or masking. Showed you how to do layer effects. It talked about different kinds of fonts, choosing the colors, and serif versus sans serif. How to warp the baseline of text so you can get these neat effects. How to choose vertical text. Play with the space in between. That is called the tracking. Sometimes I say leading, but I mean tracking. And how to move objects around. And I was very careful to show you about selecting away from your layers so that you don't make mistakes when you're working. Anyways, so this is the wine bottle tutorial. It's a fairly involved one. It was neat to use Camtasia Studio. Now I'm going to go off and edit this and put it together, and we've got a tutorial ready to go. So if I'm not in class or you need a little more help, you've got myself, you've got the file, and you've got this recording. So you're pretty well ready to go. All right, have a good one, and see you out there.